Hello again, and thanks for staying with us. Now, 8 of Deputy President Paul Mashatile's bodyguards are set to appear in the Randburg Magistrate's Court this morning. They handed themselves over to police after they were filmed attacking motorists on the N1 highway in Johannesburg. They now face assault, malicious damage to property, and other charges relating to the discharging of a firearm. Now, there have been numerous calls for the suspects not, in fact, to be released on bail. Let's unpack this now. Bring in IRS forensic investigator Chad Thomas, who joins us via our video link for more. Chad, it's lovely to have you on the program. Thanks so much indeed for making time. You know, procedurally, we do expect people to be arrested so that they finally appear in court. But one of the many questions being asked from yesterday already is why it's taken so long for them to be arrested to begin with, in a context where the evidence is so glaringly obvious that they may have been on the wrong side of the law.
Well, Ayanda, good morning to you and the listeners and the viewers firstly. When it comes to the arrest of a suspect, that's just procedural. The suspect gets called in, they get given their warning rights, they get told of the charges that are put against them, and they then go to court on the first opportune moment, which will most probably be this morning. It's not as easy as one would expect. One sees a video on social media, one thinks that this is a very serious matter, which of course it is, but there still has to be an investigation. The people that have been assaulted have to make statements, any witnesses have to make statements, and of course they need to check the veracity of the video footage. Now, although there hasn't been any dispute about the video footage, we live in an era of deepfakes where video footage can be manipulated, and so on and so forth. So in this particular instance, I'd say that both SAPS and IPID moved fairly quickly. We heard press releases come out fairly soon after the actual incident came to light. We've seen that the suspects, all 8 of them, have presented themselves at SAPS, and SAPS and IPID are sending a clear message here that they're not going to entertain a situation of so-called holy cows within the service. You must remember it's a massive department. There's around 200,000 people that are employed in that department, and there are going to be a couple of bad apples. But in this regard, the state has followed due process, and if one looks at other cases that have taken very long to enroll, this case has actually been enrolled fairly quickly.
Okay, that's interesting, because that's going to be my next question. I mean, how does the pace in this case compare to if you and I, for instance, were captured on video assaulting someone, let alone like on a highway, which caused other dangers for other motorists at least?
This case has moved along swiftly. In other cases that we deal with SAPS and the Hawks on a daily basis, we understand capacity issues, we understand that investigating officers are sitting with a massive caseload. In fact, they're sitting with double to triple the amount of dockets they should be carrying. So in this regard, it would appear, for all intents and purposes, that the state is taking this matter exceptionally seriously, based on the fact that we've seen these members appearing in court later this morning.
Sure. I wonder if they had a choice. I mean, my next question is around this evidence, of course, which I imagine is going to be submitted in court. To what extent does the fact that it's been so widely shared, has been viewed by so many people, and is really at the heart of the commentary around the story, to what extent could that complicate prosecuting in this case? Because, you know, we hopefully live in a world where, you know, cases or people presiding in court don't listen to external voices. But there's concerns, I imagine, that those voices may very well have an impact on how this proceeds.
Well, sometimes we call it trial by media, and sometimes the anticipation is that the presiding officer has absolutely no knowledge of the matter and goes in and just listens to the various versions of events and makes a decision based on that. In America, we even hear about juries being sequestrated so that they are removed from the public domain, so that they can't access newspapers and television during the course of a trial. We don't have that luxury in South Africa. Our presiding officers read the news. They're normal people like you and I. So everybody goes in with some form of knowledge of a matter, not necessarily bias. In this particular instance, I don't think that the NPA and IPID would have been at the point of proceeding if they weren't comfortable with the evidence and where they stood with witness testimony. Because remember, you can't just show footage without context. So there's going to have to be witness testimony, and most importantly, how it was taken and who it was taken. And I'm sure, without trying to see through a crystal ball, but I'm sure that the defense will question certain aspects of the footage, etc., but that's their right. Of course, they can question anything that's presented to defend their clients.
Yeah. Does it matter why the person who recorded that video did so? I mean, do you see that, for instance, being introduced in the court for either mitigation or aggravation of sentence?
No, it's in the public sphere. A lot of people use dash cams. A lot of people film different things that are happening around them. We live in a digital age. We become very reliant on the fact that so many people have camera phones and that evidence can be utilized. We see CCTV in public places. We see CCTVs on intersections attached to traffic lights. So we live in a digital age, and we're allowing that evidence to be used. So from a property perspective, from a privacy perspective, I don't see that being called to as a defense.
Right. I mean, I know you said you don't want to sort of gaze into your crystal ball, but they're facing assault, malicious damage to property, and discharging a firearm or pointing a firearm charges. Do you see them escaping this?
It will be very difficult, and I do see that it's assault and not assault GBH. A lot of people are asking, why is it assault and not assault GBH? I think the charges may be amended today. We will find out after the charge sheet is released, once they have been placed in the dock and they have heard the charges that have been put to them formally by the state. But it will be very difficult. There's overwhelming evidence in this particular case. And it'll be very interesting to hear the rationale behind this, because a lot of people took to social media as armchair warriors saying, well, we don't know what happened before these people were assaulted. Well, the simple matter is if they had done something so serious before this had happened, they would have been arrested. They wouldn't have been left there. So these members definitely do have something to account for in terms of their actions. And this is demonstrative by the fact that IPID has proceeded with the investigation and the NPA is enrolling this matter. So it's going to be a very interesting case to follow.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the commentary has also been around the culture within VIP protection services, this idea that the principals of these officials typically put so much pressure on them that sometimes they moved to a point where this is how they actually vent their frustration. That kind of reasoning, even if it were true, how much would it soften the blow, do you reckon, in a case like this?
That's a tough one. Our police are at the front line. We read about violence on a daily basis, but we don't actually experience the violence that the police themselves experience. There was an insert recently on the increase in police murders. The police themselves are volatile due to a number of issues, one of that being that criminals are callous. Policemen have to think twice normally before they react, because they realize that their defense, what they're going to do, is going to be under scrutiny, whereas a criminal doesn't care about the consequences or accountability. But that still is no excuse for the actions that we saw. And if it's proven that what we saw was in fact what in fact occurred, well, then there's no room within the South African police services for such members. And as mentioned earlier, I'm in the position where I get to meet with members on a daily basis due to ongoing investigations. And we find that the majority of members are there to do their work. They're there to try and make a difference in a country that is not quite winning the war on crime at the moment. So we can't allow an example like this to go in any way unprosecuted, and we can't not allow for the public to ventilate their issues, because the public do have a voice in all of this. And the police are a service. They're no longer a force. So this case just brings together so many different issues that are currently playing out in the public, especially pertaining to the way in which police conduct themselves.
Yeah, and it's certainly, I think, going to deal a massive blow to the already precarious trust that exists between civilians and police, right? But I'm interested to find out, Chad, I mean, in your interactions with some of the other officials, do you reckon few people in their ranks will be sympathetic to them, actually?
That's a tough one. We've always spoken internationally about the blue line, and it's the police defend one another's actions, because it's almost a case of us against them. The police do believe that there is an attack on them. It's not just in South Africa, it's internationally. South Africa just happens to have far more violent crime perpetrated and on police officers. We've seen an increase in police killings. So the police do tend to pull together to defend one another, which in some aspects, goes to the heart of the service. It's good to see that the members defend themselves, but they cannot defend the indefensible. And an assault of this magnitude by such a specialized unit is reprehensible, and it has brought about much needed debate about these blue light brigades, about the convoys that VIP protection are engaged in, and the fact that it's become an extension, in some instances, of a politician's ego.
Yeah, you know, there's that saying about justice not only being done, but also being seen to be done. Already in the lead up to this case, there are calls for these officials not to be granted bail. Tough one for the court, I imagine, to try and negotiate. What would be your advice if you had the audience of the presiding officer on this case?
If the witnesses haven't been interfered with, and the members themselves that are accused of these crimes have cooperated, then there wouldn't be a need for bail to be denied. And it appears that they have cooperated. All 8 presented themselves at Sandton Police Station yesterday, and they are currently on suspension. IPID has had the opportunity to go with the investigation and to run with it the way in which they would, according to their protocols. I'm sure witnesses have been interviewed, and the evidence, especially the digital evidence, has been looked at. So I don't foresee any reason why a presiding officer wouldn't grant bail in this particular instance.
Sure. Chad Thomas, lovely speaking to you this Monday morning. Quite interesting insights indeed. Chad is a forensic investigator with the IRS.